Welcome back to Johnny Reads. So today's is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do throughout this week, which essentially is going to be just these next 3 days. And it's basically going to kind of sum up the best, the worst, and the books that I've read this year. Now, I would also want you to keep in mind that this is only going to consist of, or it's only going to include the first 48 books that I've read this year, because that's where I am as I'm recording, and then I'll be finishing up by the end of the year at 50. But, so this is going to include just, from that first 48 that I finished. And as you can see from the title, today we're going to be talking about the worst of the books that I read this year. And what does that mean? Well, for me, that means that these are going to be the one-star reads of 2020. Just to get started on these books, I'm going to go in the order that I actually read them. So the very first one, it is The Girls by Klein. Going to be honest with you, this was one of those very, very, very rare times where I'm literally just walking through Half Price and I'm like, oh, let me see. Because I remembered when that book first came out, it was just hyped up out of this world because debut novel and Klein is such a great author, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I literally hated the book. And so, long story short, is that it very loosely follows the Manson family. And the problem, though, is that it doesn't actually focus on like the murders and the crimes. It kind of focuses on before that. And the other major problem is that because it doesn't focus on anything, there's literally no point to the story at all. It goes nowhere, and it does not accomplish anything. And when I wrote the review, the number one thought in my mind was you'd be much better off reading like a true crime version of the events that took place, because I think it's going to be not only more thought-provoking, but also more entertaining, because it's just written in a manner that nothing happens. And I'm going to repeat that over and over again during these couple of books, because the very next book that we're talking about is The Road by Cory Mccarthy. And I do not know, let me just make sure. Yes, this book won the Pulitzer Prize when it was published. I have no idea how in the world that's possible. Again, so this follows a dystopian world. Doesn't really tell you how you got there. Doesn't really tell you much about before, where you are. But if you're in the dystopian world and you're following a father and son, they're literally walking along a road, just trying to survive. And that's as great as that, I guess, sounds to some. I'm not really sure. That's all. There's nothing else that happens. And the book was written in such a weird way. It's like limited punctuation. There's no chapters. There's no names. It's like father and son, if I can recall. And I read this months ago. And it's so awful. It's boring. And I have no idea how this won the Pulitzer. The next one is Cross Country by James Patterson. Now, I'm sure some of you have seen my previous James Patterson video where I said why I'm done reading with James Patterson. And I'll link to the video here. Looking back at my review, it doesn't even matter. It was poorly written, it was boring, and it was literally the exact same thing that James Patterson produces over and over again. I have no idea why people still buy his books. The next one is It's I for Innocent by Sue Grafton. Now, Sue Grafton, probably one of the more prolific crime novelists of, I would say, last couple of decades. Her and Kinsey Malone, that was her main series, and I think Sue Grafton died when she got to X, I think, and so I don't think that series is ever going to be fully finished all the way from A to Z. But this book, it was, I hate to say it, but Kinsey, she's never been one of my favorites in terms of PIs or detectives. I read one of her books in high school, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I circled back around once I realized, okay, obviously that's not the first in the series. And I've never, I don't think I've ever read a Kinsey Malone book where I'm like, dang, that was really, really fun, entertaining, or interesting. I don't think I've ever read one of those like that for her. And so this, once again, I hate to say it, but kind of par for the course for Sue Grafton. What I noticed on this one is that Kinsey's just boring. So when you're reading the book, you kind of, when you just visualize it, or when you kind of just, as you're kind of reading through it, you think of, these are like the same descriptions that you're getting for the people. You're getting these descriptions for like places and items that have no bearing on the story whatsoever. And overall, you're just like, this isn't, this is like I'm reading a report that an actual private investigator is submitting to a client for review in terms of what they've been doing and why they're billing for what they're billing for. And the last one, as I mentioned, I thought there would be more, but this is the last one-star read of 2020 for me. And it was A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And so I just read recently The Old Man and the Sea, which was a recent video, so I'll actually link to that video here as well. But I read that recently. I was like, man, it really gave me more of a, I would say, more of a positive outlook for Hemingway after The Sun Also Rises, which I've mentioned this so many times that I keep mentioning it. I'm going to keep mentioning it, is because that book was terrible, and I don't know how anybody could talk about that book in any positive way. But anyway, so I read The Old Man and the Sea, and I wanted to read A Farewell to Arms towards the end of the year because, you know, trying to get to my goal of 50. Whew. This was actually the book that I just finished, as in just a couple of days ago. So this is fresh in my mind. And my main concern with the book is that I never once bought into the relationship. You have an American ambulance driver. He's in the Italian army during World War I. And he meets an English nurse named Catherine. And they form this little romance. And then ultimately they're an actual thing, and they're together and all of this. And so, but the thing is that it was just so unbelievable, the relationship. And because basically they meet each other towards the beginning of the book, of course, and and it's a little bit exaggerated, but you know, they have literally one conversation, and then, you know, they talk a little bit more, seeing each other, whatever, and then they're talking about love, and it's just like, but after that, so you're like, okay, so at the beginning it's a little bit silly, but after that, he gets injured, you know, in the war, and he's sent off to a hospital, you know, way away from where he's in the battle. And then what happens? Catherine shows up there too, even though the hospital, they weren't prepared yet for any patients, and they're literally just doing nothing at that point. But he goes there because he's injured, and then Catherine somehow gets sent there too. It literally makes no sense at all. But on top of that, the dialogue in this book is horrendous. Catherine, she says darling over and over and over. It seems like every sentence she says darling when she's speaking with him. But the other thing is that she does not, never once during their relationship will she ever disagree with Lieutenant Henry, the American ambulance driver. Never once. Even when they're kind of in any type of argument, she has no backbone. She's super needy. She is repetitive and honestly just overall annoying. And it just, overall, I never bought into their relationship because I thought it was, from the start, it just was so flawed and so fake. And as you read through it, even though they're Hemingway tries to show them as growing closer and, you know, dependent upon each other, just was not done very well. And so that's it. Those are the one-star reads for the year. And, you know, 2020 is kind of one of those, like, let's get it over with. And that's how I feel about all of these books. Like, once I finished them, I was just like, oh, I'm glad that it's over. But that's all I have for you today. You know, what were some of the really bad or really just not so great reads you had this year? Next up tomorrow for the video is going to be the books of the year. And then followed by, on Wednesday, it's going to be the 2020's best, the 5-star reads in this horrible, chaotic 2020. I'll see you next time.